Well, welcome everybody to the MPMA's Asset Management Awareness Month. My name is Scott Ray. I am the MPMA Vice President for Seminars and Events, and I'd like to just welcome you all to our first session of AMAM for 2026. Before I introduce our speakers today, I just wanted to go over a few things to remind you of. The first actually is that this is our first ever AMAM using Teams as our platform. So welcome. Everything is pretty much the same as you would normally expect. I think there are a lot of organizations out there that do use Teams, so this may all be familiar. If you do have any questions, please go ahead and log those into the Q&A. Jeff and David will be taking questions later towards the end of their presentation. So don't hesitate, drop that into the Q&A, and then at the end, Lisa and I will kind of facilitate getting those questions out there to be answered. In regards to CEUs, those will be awarded within a month or within a few weeks following the presentations over the next 3 weeks. So stay tuned for those. So those will be assigned, so you can check your profile in a month or so, and they should be there. And I think that is all. Lisa, you can jump in and yell at me if I did forget anything. But with that, we are well into the hundreds for today. So I don't want to hold this up any more than I already have. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and welcome in Jeff Morter and David Melancon to present on why your organization needs to know, why your organization needs to know about property disposal. And I know for me and for where I am, property disposal is always a topic of discussion within our team here at my institution. So with that, Jeff and David, thank you so much for taking the time out to put this presentation together. And I will turn it over to you for a brief intro, and you can go ahead and get started.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, MPMA, for allowing us to present here at Asset Management Awareness Month, or for Asset Management Awareness Month. Thank you for everyone for attending. We'll go ahead and jump right into it. David and myself represent GovDeals. We're an online marketplace. We provide services up to 18,000 government agencies and private sector companies. So we work with a lot of groups like the Defense Contracting Management Agency, and then we also have contracts with like Lockheed and Boeing and Northrop Grumman. And so we can support government property sales and then also commercial property sales. We have over 6 million vetted buyers. We'll talk a little bit about that vetted part in a little bit. Last year, in calendar year 2025, we did $1.6 billion in transactions. It's about 1 million transactions that we do annually. Transactions being everything from like an online auction to a sealed bid event. We're publicly traded through the NASDAQ, and that somewhat bodes well for auditability compliance purposes, especially when we're working with government partners. And then any given day on the govdeals.com marketplace, we do about 20,000 online auctions that are live every day. My name is Jeff Morter. I've been with the company for 16 years now. I started came out of the Air Force, where I was turning in property to the Defense Logistics Agency, their Duramo sites at the time. And I actually joined the GovDeals family and was on the other side of DLA, where we had a relationship with DLA, and we were actually auctioning the material off to the general public. So that's where I started. I moved a little bit over to the private sector into oil and gas industries, and now lead the federal government arm for our GovDeals business.
Yeah, good afternoon, good morning. Good to be here. I'm David Melancon. I've been with the organization for 7 years, and prior to that, I was a customer at Honeywell, where I was the capital procurement manager for just global strategy, and implemented what we're going to talk about today with a lot of our commercial divisions of Honeywell, as well as another organization called W.L. Gordon Associates that does textile or garments for the outdoor rec and military, as well as stents, and implemented asset redeployment and disposition strategy. I am the director of the account management team that works with our federal agencies. So just real quickly, high level of agenda and things that we'll be talking about. We're going to take some snippets right out of the NPMA handbook. So that strategic importance and property disposal. If you haven't looked at the handbook for a while, we're going to dust it off and talk through some of the things that are the importance of why do you need to be aware of and handling asset disposition. Who are the folks that and the different functions that should be participating, whether you're starting from the ground up and creating a process, and who those departments should be involved in, to the everyday folks that are touching and handling the assets as they get ready for disposition. And then how do you optimize it? We'll also take some snippets from what's called Investment Recovery Association. It's a bunch of peers like yourselves that are focused in investment recovery at their organizational level. And we also actively participate in that and putting together strategies of how do you reutilize, redeploy, communicate to then going eventually to either resale or all the way down to recycle. And we'll give some real life examples of what does that look like out there amongst your peers, and how did they go to market, and some trends that we've seen change and transition over the last couple of years.
So first, we'll just talk about the strategic importance of property disposal and how it has budget risk and kind of sustainability implications. So depending on how you manage your program, that could be good or bad, right? Whether it's environmental or it's sensitive property or the recovery value that you receive for any given asset. Effective and timely disposal procedures. We're going to show you some examples of timeliness on when to dispose of assets, whether it's too early or it's too late. Here in a little bit, can have a kind of an impact on your disposal property program. Disposing of assets eliminate costs that you don't necessarily see, whether that's storage costs through whether it's a warehouse or a yard. There's insurance requirements for those assets as well that go away. There might be tax exposure if you're managing real property in terms of property taxes and whatnot. Some of the challenges that we definitely see in the property disposal process can be just lag in the approval process. You may be working with a government partner that may take time to dispose of or provide those approvals. Then once you have those approvals, there may be lag in the process to even get rid of that asset. And so we'll talk through some different examples of how we kind of speed that up. There's organizational risk. There's reputational risk in terms of how you manage your assets. Are you disposing and scrapping of material that otherwise still has useful life? That may not look good in the public eye, so to speak. There's contractual obligations in terms of how you manage your disposal and timing and whatnot. Not disposing of material in a timely manner can result in theft, right? Like it's sitting in a third-party yard and something that should have been disposed of 6 months ago is now gone. So there's some risk that's associated with it there. Then there's the financial outcomes, right? So whether you're scrapping an asset or selling it for a good, useful life, like that can change the recovery value, which then could be budget that goes back into your program or back to your company. Some different trends that we're seeing currently as the industry is kind of focusing on fiscal responsibility. So getting away from the scrapping and finding kind of secondary markets for assets that can find another home, if you will. We're also partnered with Army Contract and Command. Some of you may have already kind of worked with us, but they're leading on on DFARS on actually selling government property through the contractor, and then the funds don't necessarily go back to DFAS or to the U.S. Treasury. They're actually going back into the contract, and they're using that as an offset to the cost of that contract.
There's just real quick, Jeff, to jump in there. Lots of war stories out there of the assets that have sat forever because one, you're waiting for approval to actually get to the disposition piece of it, or two, it is surplus, it is deemed surplus, but it's still in that warehouse and it's out of the way. Just like everybody who has a shed in their backyard, it's usually full, not because it needs to be, but because there's still space there and and you're not seeing that item. And so we recognize, especially as a former customer, that assets can sit for a really long time. And what we would like to try to stress is the importance of having a process that is as much of a well-oiled machine of, okay, this is when it's deemed surplus. There's a process that then follows through to disposition to optimize the financial return and or redeploy it to another location within your guys' organization.
The participants, so the stakeholders that are kind of involved in this process, the responsibilities on several folks, whether it's legal in terms of your approach to the market and purchase agreements that need to be drafted up to release you of liability, or sensitive material from export control perspective. Logistics, now I've got this property that's excess, but it needs to be managed and segregated in a separate warehouse. How are you going to do that? So there's a lot of different stakeholders that are involved in that process. So to get them involved early and often and helping you kind of build out procedure, if you will.
Yeah, and really this is as simple of how do you identify the excess property. There's lots of different ways that something may become deemed surplus. The contract may have ended, you're winding it down, or there's a product design change that has required lots of different equipment that supported it to now become surplus. You can fill in the blanks of as to how things get identified as surplus. I think the key thing is making sure you're working with your operations team and there are other varying functions, especially if you have a Six Sigma that's going to 5S lean out their manufacturing and operations. To just that last paragraph, have people walk around and identify what's surplus. And then more importantly, with all the departments that Jeff had mentioned in the previous slide, what do you do once you've identified that item as surplus? And that's where you need to have a program in place that it follows a process of reutilization, redeployment, to then all the way down to disposition. And if not, then that's where stuff finds the trash or goes and gets disposed of in a way that it shouldn't. And so making sure that in that previous slide, you are setting up that process. You've got a spring cleaning, if worst case spring cleaning, best case quarterly process where people are evaluating, do I still need that asset? Because I know there's lots of examples out there of maybe test equipment that's getting recalibrated every year through a third party or every quarter through a third party supplier. And there's been 0 additional hours on that item. And for years, they're being told what to do, which is to go recalibrate that test asset, and no one's ever using it, but they're billing you for it. It's taking up precious warehouse space. And so that's where you really want for your other participating functions across the organization to be aware that there's a process and to go and regularly identify what that might be, and then engage with that process once they've identified something that's surplus. So this is out of the Investment Recovery Association, the 7 R's, and we'll kind of highlight the best case all the way down to the worst case of how do you dispose of an asset once it has been deemed surplus. So that facilities support function walked their area and said, yeah, that backup generator is no longer needed. We're working with the federal agency right now where they've got 16 that were emergency support backup mobile generators that they just never really truly needed. And so they've done that process of, okay, it's surplus. And the good thing is they do have the next steps already in place, which is to go to market. But first, and as a former customer, you do want to reutilize. So how do you communicate to the rest of your organization that you have a backup generator? You should have some software. We use our own software called Asset Zone, or we have other ways of communicating across your organization that, hey, let's leave it up there for 2 weeks. Let's make sure that procurement is aware that there's an asset available, that could be redeployed potentially, and that's the highest cost savings for your organization. Refurbish, this is where you do have an asset that's in non-working condition, and now it's that decision of, do I refurbish it? There is still a need out there, and so the NPMA's handbook says, about 50% is your cutoff. I will say, if there is not a need for that asset, we always say do not, in most cases, refurbish or fix it, because the cost of refurbishing has gone up significantly. And I think of this a simple vehicle, your transmission's out on that 20-year-old vehicle. We would highly suggest you not refurbish that vehicle unless we can, there's an opportunity to regain and pay for itself by getting that transmission fix. There's the return. So this is the example of you purchased a bunch of items and the contract went a different direction. You've got all this obsolete. Usually follow your contractual opportunities to return that to the manufacturer. If it's within a reasonable period of time, there's usually an opportunity to do that. In some cases, it might be a restocking fee that could be 10 to 25%. evaluate whether that still makes sense. If it's more than that, if it's, say you've got now surplus new in the box inventory that is a couple years old or has barely been used, most manufacturers are not going to want that. They're just not in the business of reselling 2 to 10-year-old type of items. And so that's where your returns versus your resale, you want to work with a partner that's going to consult with you to determine what's the right and best strategy. Do you take that hit? Do you try to go and get what the OEM may be willing to pay? I've got some examples that we'll show in a little bit. Or do you take it to market where you can competitively go get potentially end users that are interested in buying that at a premium that still have a use for it? Once you get to the resale, you start to really kind of dive down into the financial return, but maybe the more IP sensitive items where, yes, we do want to go to recycle and smash that IP sensitive asset. Totally get it. I've done a lot of those in my past. Before I get to recycle, reclaim. So these are the supply chain problems of the COVID years where you need that one electrical component. You may want to cannibalize a machine to keep manufacturing running. And so there is a reason to pick apart that item to keep things going. It does diminish the value of it for sure if you're going out to the secondary market. But there's reasons to do that. And then lastly, recycle. That's where you're going to get your scrap prices. Hopefully you're going to get a fair scrap price. We see a lot of customers not get a fair one, but they've used the same scrapper forever, and therefore he doesn't stay tuned into the index of what those metals may be producing in the market. And then lastly, removal. That's really your landfill, which is the worst case scenario. We have a lot of clients that we recommend and do utilize weight that is avoiding landfill. So as they sell, redeploy, return, they actually track the amount of pounds or tons that are avoiding going landfill. So that department that Jeff had mentioned, environmental, they've got metrics. They really are usually big supporters of measuring that landfill avoidance.
So this slide is really there's an old adage that said is if you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you always got. And so this slide's more to kind of open up your creative juices to doing things differently. Buyer markets are vast. In our experience, when you talk about those 18,000 clients that we support, we do that internationally. And so we see a lot of best practices from these, whether it's government agencies or private institutions, in terms of what they do. And then there's also the buyer market that kind of supports that. And so, if you're throwing old valves into a scrap bin and you're getting good return on a scrap rate, well, there's a significant refurbishing market out there from valve manufacturers that will go in, they'll reseat everything, and they'll actually put warranties on those assets. And so this is more so just to kind of keep you open-minded as we go through the next slides, in terms of just thinking of ways to do things differently. So now that we've identified an asset, we are now going through the steps, if you will, of how do we then take that to market? So we've gone through realization. We can't return that back to the OEM. There's no need for it going forward. So now we're going to take that to market. It's not a sensitive asset, so we don't have to worry about any restrictions regarding the sale. And so these are just some sale method factors that we take into account through our consultation to our clients is, the type of property that we're selling. Is this something that's got high demand or low demand? Is it a large quantity? Is it something we're going to saturate the market with or not? The condition of the assets, is it operable or inoperable? Is this located in Guam or is this located in Alabama? So we take in all these different factors and then we kind of apply a sales channel to each of those. Online auction, very high demand type assets, very common assets, very highly competitive, open, transparent process. And so a majority of assets typically flow through an online auction. Sealed bid is good for a few things. Is you might have a unique or bespoke asset that generally doesn't have a huge demand. There may be a handful of buyers that are out there, and that market may not, from a competitive bid standpoint, like in an online auction, may not necessarily drive each other up. And so sealed bid is a good way to do a few things. One is to create margin with an offer. So you push that out there to the market and you'll get $100,000 bid and you'll get a $40,000 bid. Somebody that needs it now and somebody that's probably going to buy it on maybe future state initiative, if you will. And so it can create a large margin in terms of where the market's at and on the recovery value. Additionally, sealed bid could be used to, hey, let's go not only look at the price, but then let's use that as a mechanism to qualify the buyer. And so you can take a look at who the buyer is, what their end use may be with that asset, and make decisions on that. A good example is we worked with a company called Mondelez that makes like Oreo cookies and all types of different confectionaries out of New Zealand. And we were selling a product line that went to sealed bid, and there was a substantial offer that came in from Brazil, but it was directly competitive to them in that market. And so they, even though the numbers were good, they actually went a different route just based on who that actual company was. Negotiated sale, this is kind of more of an offline, it can be an online posting, if you will, but offline discussion. This is more so of somebody who may approach you with an offer for a given item, a subcontractor that's looking at something, somebody that may be involved in your process, whatever that is. We leverage the negotiated sale. We can pull metrics in terms of identifying and understanding what market values are. As a negotiated sale, especially if somebody comes to you with a direct offer, it can be pretty tricky to determine, like, is that a good offer or not? And so we obviously leverage a lot of our past experiences in sales to understand what that is. What also is all really good about a negotiated sale is it gives the buyer a little bit of credit, a little bit of say in how that sale process is going to be managed. An online auction and a sealed bid is very seller controlled. You're going to bid at this time. You're going to take on this liability. You're going to remove it in this way. You're going to pay by this period. A negotiated sale may give the buyer a little bit of flexibility in negotiating the terms of the sale with you. Hey, I need 3 weeks to make this payment so I can get funding, things of that nature. So it can actually increase recovery value depending on the type of sale. Now that we've identified the asset, we generally know how we're going to move that asset through which sale channel. We need to make sure that we're doing that in a risk compliant way, right? There's a lot of risk, if we're not selling furniture on Facebook Marketplace here. We're selling assets that are going to go into an end user that's going to then use that asset. And so we want to be mindful of who that end user is. And so, through what we do on GovDeals side is we actually use a software integrated system that screens our buyers against restricted party lists. So excluded party list system for those that may have a history with that nomenclature. We ensure that no one's on a U.S. government list or international list, so lists from China, from NATO, United Nations, so on and so forth. Or make sure we're selling that to a good buyer, not a illicit party that's going to use it for some type of illicit activity. It gets into the media, then they're all of a sudden you get questions. Everything from data security, so there's compliance around protecting the information that flows through our system. EH&S, David kind of talked a little bit earlier about sustainability initiatives and making sure that from working with your environmental team that you're doing things sustainably, whether that's tracking the weight or keeping things out of the landfill. And then any other internal requirements. We work with a lot of Department of Energy, the contractors that support those government-owned labs, if you will. There's some internal requirements, whether that's selling it into within the United States only, getting an end use certificate, non-proliferation agreements from the buyer. You want to make sure that you've encompassed all that. And that goes back to the key stakeholders, right? Is working with your legal team to make sure you're covered off on some of that stuff.
But one last addition there would also be making sure that everything that is being sold, that buyers are agreeing to as is, where is, with all faults, no warranty, where it's at. All of those things matter. And so, that's why you don't go to eBay, or that's why you don't go to Craigslist or OfferUp or others. You want to make sure that the buyers are truly vetted, they are registered, they are agreeing to terms and conditions at the beginning of discussions with a purchase, and so that you have that buffer of legal coverage on the sale of your assets.
So now we've identified the asset, we know generally what sale channel we're going to sell it through. We've got we've mitigated the risk in a sense. Now it's kind of time to kind of publicize that asset. I'll turn it over to David to kind of talk through the next slides here.
Yeah, so yeah, once the process is there, we're ready to go to market. You do want to work with a partner. It doesn't have to be us, but somebody who's going to push your assets out to their buyer base, but also go out and reach new buyers to make sure you're optimizing the financial return. And so we're going to go through a number of examples of what this looks like out there amongst your peers and show you how marketing drove it, but also then how you have a partner that consults with what's the best way to go to market. And so here's an example of one I'll show you in a second here. That's a tractor, a 1999 case tractor from Mississippi University. And so shout out to Kerry if he's there, but we have marketing takes that and they accumulate and move it to our buyer base. And so having a good buyer reach is important, but also making sure that you're locked in with what is your expectations, what are your needs on that financially. So, and most platforms will give you the ability to protect an asset, so you can put a reserve, and that means that that asset won't get awarded unless it achieves that dollar amount, turns green in our instance, and then tells the buyers, hey, whoever's the high bidder on this wins. And so, you know, the previous slide showed different ways of going into third-party listings and making sure buyers are being attracted to your item. And in this case here, this was out of Mississippi, but had 9 unique bidders. The buyer that ultimately won was out of North Dakota, and you can see all the other participating states that were involved. And the key thing is that it exceeded their expectation by $34,000, that reserve price. And so they were pleased with it. And so there's a lot of financial opportunity to bring back and be a fiscal steward of the assets that you have. I know I use a simple tractor because I figured everybody would relate to that one and understand what it is. You get into test equipment, you get all the way down to furniture. You get lots of different categories that hopefully will show you and open up the mindset of they have value in the secondary market. Consult with your partner is really key. And Jeff alluded earlier on that we do see a trend of organizations saying, hey, I used to push that easy scrap button because that was kind of the process. In this case, this was with a DCMA contact that reached into us and said, you know, we tend to just send this, you know, to scrap, but what do you think? It's a tugboat. It's old. It had termite issues in the wood, and it had some leaking issues, and it did not run. And in our platform, at least, there's no cost of listing. I said, nah, that's gonna have some value. So let's put it up there for 2 weeks. If it doesn't sell, no cost to you. Go ahead and go your easy route of scrapping it. Not to mention it's in Honolulu, Hawaii, but went out to auction and super pleased with the results. 131 bids, $84,000 back to the government agency. And then this sold to a small tugboat service provider out of Long Beach, California, only 300 employees. And I looked at all the other buyers who were bidding, and they were all smaller outfits from different states. And so it was a win for the seller, a win for the buyer. They then got it operable and moved it on its own power down to Long Beach, and now it's working instead of being scrapped in the field somewhere. Another example of consulting, again, it was, hey, this is the trend of this, not sure what to do with it, usually went to the scrapper, but a former DCMA who had used this, officer had used this in the past, is now at a new organization and reached in, quick consultation, nope, let's put that up, it's in good condition, and let's go ahead and sell it. And so another example of just value in the secondary market. And so if you go to the next slide, we don't always get pretty looking things, and that's also worth consulting with your partner that's going to help you dispose of that asset. And so this was our Army partner out of Fort Meade, and this was their first asset. This was their test. Hey, can you get rid of this eyesore that's been around for a really long time? Obviously, if I were to scroll through all the other pictures, they don't look any prettier than the one that you see right there. It had been sat there for a really long time. But we said, again, let's go ahead and put it out there for a week and a half. We've got buyers for all kinds of conditions, and they're buying it as is, where is, with all faults. And another key piece to it is that buyers should be responsible for removal in most instances. I know on our platform they always are, but you should consider that as well, because there's a cost of removal avoidance. The tires are clearly rotted out. They had to come on their own power with their own trailer, move it on that trailer, and move it off, and now that eyesore is no longer there at the base. So in the 7 R's of reutilization down to returns to the OEM or who you purchased it from, here's a real life example of some networking switches that were new in the box, a few years old, and they did have an offer from their manufacturer and their supplier. And so they consulted, and that's where I want to really highlight again, work with an expert who can help you, guide you to do what's right for your organization. They had an offer of $70,000. We sold this, I think it was, just a few months ago in November. We said, why don't we go ahead and protect it at 70,000? So worst case, you're going to get what the OEM is offering you to take that back. But I think we can do more. And so put it through a competitive auction and sold for really 72% more at $121,000. So just an example of really working together to make sure that you can get the highest return.
Yeah, just to answer the reserve met question. So a reserve is just a price for protection. So I want at least $70,000, as David alluded to there. Once it meets the $70,000 threshold, the reserve met. It's met at that point. And so at that point, the bidders are then bidding and they know that they're going to be awarded that asset. The reserve is just more of a protection in the online auction environment.
Yeah, Jeff, I'd go ahead and suggest as I'm going through, there are some Q&As that are some really good selling classified property, or we can maybe get into the NSN numbers and the classifications to make sure that they can be sold. Also have some examples of some assets that are allowed to go to the secondary market, but they are restricted to just U.S. buyers only. And how do we handle that? So maybe take a peek at that, Jeff, while we're through it. Timing is obviously a critical one. We see all conditions and all timing, but the best case is this is where you do want to have that quarterly review, if not semi-annuals, maybe a little too long, of what surplus. Example to the left, again, something that I figured everybody would be understood what that is. That's a sit-on a ride-along mower. It's still in the warehouse. It's still in operating condition, and is going to find an end user who's going to buy that at a high dollar amount versus what we see oftentimes, which is, nope, that sat there for 2 decades. But there's still a parts buyer out there that's going to go take those items and reutilize them. So you can see the difference from a $25,000 purchase to a $600 purchase. This was a helicopter that we sold last week. So an example of, here's a category or commodity that's of high value. Do you take it to an auction competitively, or do you take it to a sealed bid? For common commodities, we would suggest going to an open competition. And so in this example, the reserve was at 900,000. So that's what the agency wanted to get. You see that red bar, that actually means I cut it off, but that's a restricted parties sale where it can only go to a U.S. buyer and be reviewed prior to being released to that, as well as sometimes we have a FAA holders only, so we can restrict to certain parties that you may need to sell to. That hit $900,000, and then it went up to 2.8 in overtime bidding. And so there was this high degree of interest. And so what I mean by overtime is it was set to close at about 6 p.m. and it went continually up another $1 million as it went into overtime bidding. Another example is when you want to consider a sealed bid. So when you don't know what the value truly is, you're not sure what level of competition, and in some cases it's that obsolete bulk inventory that you don't necessarily want to show the buyers what is the next available bid. So in this particular example, we consult with the client and say, here's the best way to go forward with this. We had bids that ranged from 300, 400, and the second highest bid was 500,000. But you can see it sold for 730. That's a go-to-market strategy that you want to keep in your back pocket, because we didn't want that highest bidder bidding at the 500,000. We want them to put their best and final offer on a very large package of obsolete aircraft parts that were for multiple platforms. And therefore they were quite happy. So just kind of highlighting a different strategy here of how you can go to market with your items. Working with a platform and an organization that has a high reach. So this is kind of making sure you have all categories. They can sell in lots of different categories, but also have the reach for different buyers. So in this case, they're just used water meters. They're going to be buying for the brass, and You can see the statistics to the left of the activity from several different states, from where this was being sold out of New York, and then driving significant value, back to the agency. Another example of a reach and kind of an EPA or environmental example. This was an old food truck at a military base that brakes didn't work. Several other things weren't in operating condition. You cannot take a diesel vehicle and re-register it after a certain age back in the state of California. So you've eliminated where to sell it to a buyer who's no longer able to buy it in that state. So making sure that you have somebody who can help really maximize the return to their reach of their buyer base. And so you see the statistics on the left side there. This ended up selling to a buyer in New York who trailered it over from San Diego to their New York facility, and paid quite a bit to do so. But all the other states that were participating in that auction. We get to often, what does go to sale? What should you go to sale? And so it's another consultation until you feel comfortable with what you can take. This is one of my clients, and you can see here, not much there to be looked at. But if you look at the tail end, there is that the back section that the buyers are probably going to buy and resell as a parts. And so there's a cost to remove that the agency was able to avoid, and the buyer is now going to go pick that up and remove it. I use a forklift because everybody has them, right? And so example of just what else can you sell? What can you ask your other functions? If you have a warehouse, you have a forklift, might be leased, which is fine, but there's so many common assets within any operation that have secondary value that should be being asked, and making sure that your functions that support your organization are aware of that have value out there. Almost done with the examples here, and I think we'll get to the questions then next, Jeff, or do you want me to pause and start to hammer through those?
Yeah, no, it's okay. I've been kind of getting at them, so keep going.
Okay, great. Yep. So, we for a lot of DoD contractors, you get a lot of test equipment out there, and once it's gone through the vetting process, that it can be sold as surplus. There's a huge market for that, right? There's so many mid-tier organizations that don't have the capital to buy new, and so they play in this area of can I buy it from another organization that no longer needs it. We also have a large dealer network that's going to buy that, slap a warranty on it, refurbish it, and then sell it to that audience that doesn't have the capital to buy new. And so there's, the big budgets usually do buy new, but there's so many that play in that smaller space. And so you will see some of those go for quite a bit of financial return. Sit on IT for a minute because it's a sensitive topic, right? There's a lot of IP in it, and this is where when you engage with your other functions that support a disposition program, is to find out, what does the IT department require. They're going to probably want to have that hard drive smashed, at minimum wiped. But there's I think a misknown idea that you always have to pay for your IT items to be recycled. And if you go to recycler, they will do what you ask them to, whether that's a wipe or a data destruction. And I'd always suggest you work with an R2V3 certified. That's a certification that is out there in the recycling industry, as well as an IT asset disposition certification. That being said, though, there is a lot of value in IT assets. And so I gave you some examples on the left-hand side that if you have those, you really should not be paying to dispose of them. These recyclers, if they're not giving you money back, they should. And if you're just simply handing it over to them at no cost or paying for it, they will do the data destruction, and then they oftentimes will resell it. We see a lot of that on our platform. So just some just kind of something to think about. It really, you do have to work with your IT. Sometimes that's hard for them to open up to how to sell, because they would rather smash it and make sure it never gets in the hands of anybody else. And I understand that. We did that one of my previous employers, but there's also a pretty big upside opportunity to regain some of that financial recovery. If you're looking for a federal agency that does that is R2V3 certified, that does recycle and or destroy IT assets at no cost to the agency or the customer, Unicor is a good one that we'd recommend and work with pretty regularly. But example of even on the bottom right there, those unused toner, there's no IP in unused toner, and most people would pay to remove that or recycle it. But if for name brands, it actually, there's a hot market for it. And so hopefully that opens up some of the ideas and thoughts of what you can do to regain some of your investment. Cost avoidance and removal, like I have tons of examples as a former client of big stuff that was really costly to remove. And this is always on the buyer. They do need to come in with the right requirements that you have for your facility. Sometimes that's making sure they can, pass a background check, that they can get on a federal agency location, or that they have an insurance and removal plan that they can present for your facility folks to feel comfortable in having them do the work with the appropriate contractors. But there's always value on some of that big heavy stuff to remove. And sometimes you save, in this case, sold for $350, you save a lot more by avoiding the removal costs and having the buyer do all that than you did have to pay and have your own resources or team remove the item. Here's an example of just a bunch of auditorium seats. There's somebody who's going to love to take those and reutilize them. The cost of removing was $25,000. They sold it for $1. No one got rich there, but you save some budget that you can reutilize somewhere else.
And the last example that we'll provide here, and then we'll get into some of the questions. This was some assets that were being sold by Ron Regalato, who's I think 2024 property management professional for MPMA, since retired for Defense Contract Management Agency. This is working with General Atomics. Kid Fears, if you're on the call, thanks for your help in all this. But ultimately what this was some raw materials, some stock that was historically just go straight to the scrap bin. Obviously, there's once you send something to scrap bin, it gets smelted. There's carbon emission. So this is more of a sustainability, slide, if you will. We took that to market, generated really good recovery for them, and now this material is going out and being used for other end uses, for new homes, if you will, but didn't have to go through a smelting process. And that really kind of concludes. So we wanted to provide, again, the overall organizational structure, the importance of a property disposal program, working with your key partners in kind of mitigating some of the risks, increasing recovery where you possibly can, understanding the process of asset identification or excess identification. And then once you've identified those assets, going through that ladder of value, right, from reutilization all the way down to landfill, is making sure you're kind of ticking the boxes on exactly how you're going to manage that process. At this time, again, we just want to thank MPMA for allowing us to present during Asset Management Awareness Month. We'll allow those that would like to go at this time. And if anyone wants to hang back for questions, we're happy to take on questions. And if you're not comfortable speaking out loud or coming forward with questions, our emails are there. If you want to send us any questions, we're happy to kind of provide you some additional information.
So Jeff and David, thank you again for taking the time today. I wanted to know how you wanted to go forward with some of the questions. I was just taking a look at the Q&A, and there is quite a few. Are you able to see the Q&A, or would you like me to read some of those questions over to you or out to you?
Yeah, I was able to keep up with a few of them there, and then it kind of looked like it got locked up, so I could only see maybe 3 or 4 questions. So I can't see beyond that. I think I answered the majority of questions.
Okay. There was a one around the classified property.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk through that one? Because there's probably quite a few folks on this one that do have classified.
Yeah, there was another question, I think, on national stock numbers. So especially when you're dealing with the Department of War, there's going to be national stock numbers that flow through maybe your processes. Those NSNs, there's a group with a DLA, I think Government Accountability Office is involved in that, that assign disposal mechanisms for those national stock numbers. So it could be a sensitive asset. They use what's called the demilitarization process, so DMLA up to, I can't remember what it is now, Q. That'll tell you exactly what you need to do with those assets. Historically, we saw a lot of DML-A. There is some DML-Q that has end-use certificate requirements. So for classified property, it just would be going through the semantics of identifying exactly what it is and then applying, whether or not we're allowed to sell that at all. One, it has to be destroyed, or it may have requirements like David alluded to earlier, like it may only be sold to a U.S. citizen and may require end-use certificates, so that buyer would then have to provide, hey, I'm going to use this asset to, manage some kind of process on my farm, whatever that may be. So it would just be specific. We'd have to kind of look at the assets and itemize what the disposal mechanisms would be for those.
So there was a question that came in just now, actually. And the question is, what would you recommend if you had assets to list, but had no official location to allow public to view?
Well, a lot of the online, we have a lot of locations that sell sensitive assets or just it's online preview only. And so they're not allowing buyers to come in and inspect. Now, I think maybe the question might be is how does the buyer get on site to pick up their item once they have purchased it? And that would be something we'd have to iron out. They would need to get access to it. And sometimes that means with some of our organizations, they actually bring the asset outside the gate and meet that awarded buyer at a location where they can then transfer it from there. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so there's
Okay.
different ways we can approach the market. So if it's maybe sensitive assets that need to go to a very distinct set of buyers, we can run private marketplace. So we can create an online listing, if you will, but it's only, we only allow certain entrants to come in and look at that. So that might be a way to kind of qualify buyers and make sure it doesn't go to public, but you still have a kind of a competitive bid environment. And then as David kind of alluded to, it just depends on site requirements. It could be a contractor facility with high security requirements. We sell pretty much every military installation, so we know, entry requirements for those sites. There's some military installations that only allow, people with military ID cards or base access cards to get on site that can participate in those auctions. So more of like a restricted sale, if you will, for buyers that meet those requirements.
Awesome. So I think, Lisa, unless you can see something I cannot, I think that was the most recent question. I see, Jeff, that you had responded to the other questions that had come through with a comment. If there are any other questions out there, please please go ahead and send those in. And let me just double check the chat real quick.
Hi,
Okay. Yes,
Scott,
go
we have
ahead.
a question. Someone asked if we could send their attendance to Rebecca for certification. That is not something we do, but the information will be available on your transcript that you can send to Rebecca. I can let her know that you attended, but typically that is not something we do. That is up to the person seeking certification renewal to do that.
And there was a question that actually came through on the chat. So so Jeff or David, whoever wants to take this one. So it says earlier on you had mentioned a tool that you use for usable excess property to be evaluated and shown during a procurement stage. They said that they believe you said the term asset zone. Is there a specific subscription service or website that this is located on for us to review? And then it goes on to say, I think that having an easy access tool during procurement process would be a fabulous idea to help reutilize internally.
Yep. Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking. I can take it, Jeff, and you can add to it. But yeah, that is our tool that we use for asset redeployment. So I closed a lot of factories during my time at Honeywell, and we would throw up 150, 200, 500 assets at a time for availability across the organization to redeploy. And so anybody, as the procurement manager of capital assets, I kind of use that as my Bible to say, hang on, our budgets are going to say we're going to forecast to purchase 7 forklifts this year. There's 15 to choose from. That's a couple states over from that consolidation. And we would do a lot of redeploying there. There is no subscription fee to it. We charge a little bit of a seller commission. So assets that actually get sold through the process would be charged a seller commission for that utilization. So or that tool, there's no subscription to it. I often tried to keep that as kind of, you think about a grocery store shelf. Asset Zone was my redeployment tool utilized at this organization. And as long as my shelves were full of assets, people were always going in there and redeploying to their other locations. And so if you think about measuring the success of a program, anything that you can avoid buying new because you redeployed it from down the street or across the country, in some cases, is a significant win for the organization from a savings perspective.
Yeah, and it's policy driven too. So if you don't have policy at the top that drives people to look at that program, then it'll fail. So you need to work through property management offices, your procurement department, like in the requisition acquisition phase, like they need to make sure that's ticking the box and going and looking at that prior to then moving forward with the purchase on a new order. So there's some organizational structure that needs to be in place for that to be successful.
All right. And I found some more questions also that were kind of dropped into the chat. So I'll just go through them right now. First question that came in, would you mind going over the meaning of reserve met again? I think there was a question just on the meaning of reserve met.
Yep, I can take that, Jeff. Reserve met is that's an asset, that's to protect your asset at a certain dollar amount. So let's say you have a net book value of $20,000 and you say I absolutely need to get and recoup that $20,000. You put in a reserve and it shows to the bidders as they're bidding from 9,000, 10, 15,000 that the reserve is not met. It will not get awarded to the highest bidder if it ends at 15,000 or anything under that $20,000. Once it hits that reserve price or that protection at 20,000, it then turns green in our system and says, hey, buyers, this is going to be awarded to the highest bidder. Usually creates a frenzy of bidding because there's a high degree of confidence, obviously, that's going to get awarded. So that's an asset price protection mechanism that we use.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Next question. How much do you charge for your service, for GovDeals service?
Yeah, great question. We usually charge a buyer's premium, and it ranges depending on what your needs are as far as what we think as far as volume that might look like on the platform. But it's charged to the buyer side. So if you think about, for example, I sold something for $100, the buyer may pay $118, and then that's our $18 is our profit that comes to our organization. For certain fees or I'm sorry, other tools like the Asset Zone, there might be a seller commission that's added in there. That's a few different strategies of 5% is pretty common for that utilization.
Okay.
Yeah, but at no
awesome.
point do we charge like a fee to register, a fee to list, no fees to you. We charge based on a successful transaction. So a lot of our efforts, the marketing efforts, our consultation up front on kind of setting the sales strategy is very important for a successful sale. So we invest our time there to have a successful transaction so we can charge those rates, but no fees or registration costs or anything like that up front.
Yeah, no
Awesome.
point should you ever be charged to dispose of your assets. I mean, we or your partner that you utilize should be a supplier that pays you funds. And so I made millions of dollars of going back to our organization's budgets by disposing of assets.
So we did have, I was just doing a quick check here to see if the person was online, but they are not. But I'll ask the question anyway in case others had questions about it. There was, and Jeff, this was directed at you. It talks about an NSN and just asked if you could kind of break that down a little bit more about what an NSN is.
Yeah, so it's a national stock number, primarily used in a lot of in military applications. and it's just a way to identify the commodity of that asset. Like, so it's got different components. So it can be alphanumeric, but the first part is like, let's just say for simplicity, 1, 2, 3. Well, that identifies it as a transportation asset, and then 4, 5, 6 that identifies it as a covered van, and then 7, 8, 9 is an armored covered van. And so that NSN is just really a kind of a serialized ID that then categorizes that asset, and then based on that, then there might be disposition channels that are associated to that national stock number.
Just to reiterate, that's usually required for DoD type of support and military type of support assets. If you're a commercial organization selling commercial items, you're not really playing in that world.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. And last question that I see that was in the chat here before I go back and check Q&A here. Are items submitted through the PIEE plant or PI plant clearance process listed on GovDeals?
Yeah, so we'll have government partners that like Blue Army Grass Depot. So Bechtel is running that operation. So through their government partner, they'll run it through PI for a reutilization process. So that'll go through, I think, GSA Access. That has so many days to do that. Once it's met that mark, it then becomes available for sale. And at that point, our system will pick it up and then we'll sell that asset. But to be clear, it's not an integrated system with GSA Access or PI. It doesn't directly flow into that system, into our process.
All right, awesome. Lisa, that's all of the questions that I can see in both the chat and the Q&A. Do you see anything else that I may have missed?
I do not.
Okay. All right. Oh, actually, we had some.
One just popped in.
Yeah, I think it was just breaking down the NSN a little bit more in the chat. So I think we're okay. So if you do have any other questions for Jeff and David, their contact information is listed here on the slide. I believe we're gonna make these slides available. I think that was the question that we may have covered that. I just may have forgotten. But Jeff and David, thank you so much. This is a really informative presentation. I really enjoyed listening to it, and you were getting props in the chat as well. So I think everybody else enjoyed it. So thank you for taking the time to put this together. Thank you for presenting to us to lead off AMAM for 2026. And with that, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us. Please do join us next week. We have a presentation on March 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern as well. That's going to cover the importance of certification. And then also we have our third and final event on March 18th, which will cover advancement of property management with a modern approach to tracking assets. So with that, I again want to thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. We will see you along the line at either a future AM presentation next week or and perhaps in person at an NES. So again, thank you again to our presenters, and hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at
Thank
NES.
you.